Okay, if everybody can hear me, I will start talking. I want to welcome everyone this morning to the Diamond Valley Writers Guild monthly meeting, and I'm happy to have you all here. It's always great to be among people who are creative, and I could feel the vibe even over the internet, and it's just wonderful. In my previous life, I was a salesman, and I always loved being with salesmen. They were the greatest people for storytelling. And now I'm with writers who are the greatest people for storytelling. So my life has been blessed in that way. I also want to welcome our special guest, Les Edgerton, who I will introduce after we get our club business done, which will only take about 20 minutes or so. And so we'll get started. Michelle, would you like to speak to us about membership?
So I'm vice president of Diamond Valley Writers Guild, and my primary responsibility is membership. So probably at some point or another, all of you have gotten emails from me because I kind of do that. It is not required to join the guild in order to participate, but we'd love to have you as members, and I'll put that information in the chat when I get back to my computer. But our goal this year is 100 members, and we're almost halfway there already, and it's only February. Normally we hit our stride by about June with people, but I'll send that information. The other thing is that we are looking for a helper slash apprentice slash assistant for Liam to do the hybrid Zooms. So the more people that know how to use the equipment in the event of something unexpected, like an illness or some other, unforeseen delay, we won't have to forego the Zoom and do only a live meeting that month. So that is our primary objective now for the Zoom, is to find a couple of backup people. So if you are interested, please just email the guild or message me in the chat, and I'll reach out to you and tell you what's involved with that. I know those of you in other countries and other states far away can't participate in that regard, but if you are someone local, we'd love to have a helper on that. And that's about it. Thank you.
Okay, is Lynette here?
She's having a little issue this morning. She'll be a little late, so she'll do her report when she gets on.
Okay. Well, Ellen Wolf, are you here? Ellen, going once?
She just texted me and telling me she's having trouble logging on to her Zoom. So she may be late too.
Okay. Well, let's move on to recent publications and successes that people have had. And I won't limit it to just our members. So anybody who's had some recent success with their writing, please raise your hand. And there is a hand raising symbol that you can use too. And Michelle will take note. So,
thank you. Our first up is Dennis. He's at the mic.
I'll just say that fortunately I've had some marketing opportunities within the last month and a half for the 2-cent piece. It's the story of a little girl who has the first coins with the words "In God We Trust." And so two things have happened. One, I had a blog tour through Celebrate Lit. It ended up having, in a 14-day period, 19 bloggers reviewing my work. Those are now on Amazon, so someone can go there and see what kind of reviews I got. But I'm at 4.5 out of 27 reviews at this point, and the book is relatively new, so I'm excited and encouraged by that. The other thing is that this month, through the Christian Indie Publishing Association, CIPA, I'm also doing some marketing, and there's a blitz that will go out, one of 4 books, similar to the way we send out books from the Guild. Those books will end up being focused on, or those 4 books will be highlighted to 20,000 Christian consumers. So I'm looking forward to some results from that. But fortunately, my second book happens to be coming up, and I'll be meeting with my editor in March. And so I'm very excited about all the work that's going on. So thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Anyone else in the room that has an announcement about any recent publications or successes? Go to the mic. Hold on just a second, and then I'll start working my way through the people on Zoom.
Hi, I'm Greg Porterfield. Back in January, I published this and available on Amazon right now. It's called Committee 10. It's my 10th book that's on Amazon. And basically, to give you some idea what it's about, the committee, mysterious worldwide think tank, needs to discover why the group's international operations are drifting into chaos and threatening world stability. William Vargas and Mickey Evans are soon drawn into a web of mystery by a senior member of the committee. We find a malevolent criminal organization at work with the goal of disrupting the world's social, economic, and political structures. The struggle to uncover these behind the mayhem tests everyone's ability as they rush to answers before it's too late.
All right.
It's only available in hardback. I'm sorry, it's not an ebook or anything like that. But hope you enjoy it if you decide to buy it.
Anyone on Zoom? I don't see any raised hands on the Zoom. Is there anyone? Wave at me frantically. I see Barbara. Go ahead, Barbara.
I will be publishing my first novel in May.
Barbara, you're muted.
I am still? No, I'm unmuted.
She's
I'm
not muted.
unmuted.
We can hear her.
Okay.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Thank you. I'm publishing my first novel, women's fiction with suspense, elements of suspense in May. It's called Secrets in the Hollow, a Sleepy Hollow story. It's a story with Mindster Publications. And if anyone has ever heard of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, I grew up in Sleepy Hollow and am kind of obsessed with the town. It's about a story about Carrie, a 40-year-old woman who returns back to her hometown after her parents die and have to face her poor decisions from high school, which resulted in the deaths of two friends.
Thank you. Thank you. Susan, you're next.
Thank you.
Did you mean Sue or Susan? Is there a Susan?
Sue. Yeah, Sue, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, my name is Sue Andrews. I'm from the California Writers Club in the Inland Empire. And I just had my short story memoir published in the Literary Review. It comes out annually for all the 22 members of branches, to all the members of the 22 branches, And it was a short story about my experience during COVID when I had my fourth heart attack. And it starts out sad and then it ends up happy, because I thought when I left my home, I thought it was going to be the last time I'd see my husband. And that was quite sad. And I was already preparing my obituary in the ambulance. But then when it turned out to be a good ending and I did get to come home, the Reuben sandwich that my husband sent via one of the hospital staff members, I thought to myself, oh, well, the only thing or person that needs an obituary was the Reuben sandwich that I ate like I ate my last meal. So it ended up to be funny and happy at the end. It was a twist. So I'm proud about that. It just came out in December and it is on Amazon if you want to check it out. California Writers Club Literary Review for 2022.
So, Sue, can you put, in fact, anyone who's made these announcements, if you put links in the chat so everyone can link to your books, that would be fabulous.
Okay, I don't know the link, but I will write how to get it. Thank you.
Perfect, and welcome, by the way. Welcome to all of our recent guests that have never attended before. By the way, Ellen is now here. Oh, Karen, was that your hand raised?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
I just was going to publicly thank Howard for helping me get started on Substack. and encourage all of you, if you are interested in just publishing little pieces. He's been quite successful, and I decided I'd give it a whirl. So I published one piece on there, and I think I'm around 140 readers already and about 24 subscribers. And I think that's probably more than the amount of people that have read my books. So I thought that was a really fun thing to do. I would encourage the rest of you. It's kind of fun. Thank you, Howard.
And we have another hand that was raised. Where'd it go? Wait a minute, it was there a second ago. Chad, you had your hand raised?
No, I didn't. It was just an applause. Congratulating.
Well, good. Well, then congratulations, and hi, Chad, nice to see you. As I said, Howard, Ellen is on now.
Ellen, would you like to give us a report on Straight Jackets magazine? Can't hear you. Yeah, your sound isn't coming through.
You're muted, Ellen.
No, she's not muted.
No?
Just Are you connected, Ellen? Is your audio connected?
She's not muted on our end, so I don't know.
Okay, well, we'll come back to you, Ellen, while you find out what you're doing there. And we'll go to Lynette.
Ellen, maybe you could bring up your audio app, your little audio symbol, and see where your microphone and speaker go and come from.
Okay, while she's doing that, why don't we hear from Lynette, our director at large.
Good morning, everyone. Happy February, although we're pretty much halfway through. Hope you had a great Valentine's Day. I appreciate everybody who's giving monthly feedback from the meetings. It helps us know the directions that we need to go for the guild. And I just want to share an interesting fact with you guys, because I think it's pretty exciting. We have 5% of our people that came to the January meeting that are outside the USA, which is pretty cool. We've got 41% in California, sorry, small dogs. And, you know, so we've got like half our membership that's outside of California. I think that's really exciting that we can have such an outreach. Also want to encourage everybody to take advantage of Straight Jackets, because we've got about, at least according to the survey, about 50% of our membership that submits to Straight Jackets, and it's a wonderful opportunity. I'm sure Ellen will tell us some more about it. And if you've got books published and you're a member, remember to send that your information. I'd like a book cover, a small blurb, and a link for your sales. And we'll include that in our monthly newsletter that goes out celebrating your successes. So thank you, everybody, and look forward to your feedback from this meeting.
Well, thank you, Lynette. Ellen, how are we doing?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, hooray. I don't know what, I had the blue screen of death last week and my computer crashed. So
Oh, no.
apparently I haven't gotten everything back in order. Anyway, so Straight Jackets Magazine. Well, we've been receiving your submissions. Thank you for that. Cheryl will be in touch with you, letting you know that she's received them. Our deadline, our drop deadline is March 22nd. As you know, Cheryl and I have decided to do 2 magazines per year instead of 3. So we'll be doing spring and fall. So again, deadline is March 22nd. So if you haven't start writing and send them to us at straightjacketsmagazine@gmail.com. And you can go into the magazine, which is straightjackets, STIAIT.org. And in the upper left-hand corner, you will find 3 little lines. Click, go down to be a contributor, and it has all the information there about we expect from your submissions and dates and all that good stuff. So we're looking forward to reading your work. And I will just throw this out there. We, as you all know, we lost Jolynn Bering, one of our editors. And at some point in the not too distant future, we will be looking for another editor. So, so start thinking about that. We're not quite ready yet, but it's a fun project and very satisfying. Anyway, we look forward to reading your submissions, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
No, thank you, Ellen, and thank you for getting back on. And I always like to crow about Straight Jackets magazine. The ladies who edit do such a fabulous job. They're great editors, and they help every writer reach their better self. And I think that's a wonderful thing in a writing group. And also to have a link to the outside world where your short stories, your poems are published and online, and people have more access to you and who you are. So you do a great job, Ellen, and Cheryl as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, now for our writing tips, Jim Hitt.
Thank you, Howard. A bit of history about Straight Jackets is very, just throw this out a little interesting, perhaps. Straight Jackets magazine started back in 2008 when a small group of us met at the Wheelhouse under the leadership of Ray Straight. And so somewhere along the way, I started with the group in 2006. And so I made a suggestion about 2008. So why don't we publish a little magazine ourselves and start there? And that's where that started, 2008. Now, I got sick for a while, and so it went on hiatus. At that time, this organization was formed, and I suggested the group take over Straight Jackets, which it did. And Ellen and Cheryl and Lynn, when she was with it, have done a great job with the magazine. I was using the old Dreamweaver, and they have really streamlined the magazine and really made it a terrific 21st century kind of magazine. I think they've done a great job with it. Okay, today I'm going to, last time I talked about adverbs, and I want to say this, when I talked about them, I wasn't talking about writing fiction or nonfiction. It's about writing anything. Adverbs you want to stay away from as much as possible. And so what I'm going to talk about today is the same thing. It is going to be whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction. And I'm going to talk about conjunctions, specifically and but. Now, fortunately, we have a writers group on Thursday, we do, and we have a arbitrator of buts, and that's Howard. And he does a great job with that. I do want to say this about conjunctions. I was an English teacher for 40 some odd years, and I told people the wrong thing. And most of the teachers that you've had have probably also told you the wrong thing. For instance, one example about prepositions. Don't end a sentence in a preposition, right? Like in or out or whatever. Don't end a sentence that, well, apparently there's no rule on that. There's no rules that said that's wrong. Now, when I'm citing this material, you're going to wonder where I'm getting it from. This is the Chicago Manual of Style. All your major publishers are using this, unless you're writing some kind of nonfiction work, like for a university press. Then there's another style I think it's called the ALA, American Language Association manual. And they have some slightly different rules. But if you're going to get published in mainstream, this is what you go with. And this is where I found this information about prepositions. I taught it to students too. You don't end a sentence with prepositions, but it's okay. About conjunctions. Let's talk about conjunctions. Now I'm talking about and but. Everybody uses and but. And all the time you've been using it, I'm sure teachers told you and other writers said, oh, never start a sentence with a conjunction. It's wrong. No, there's no rule against it. It's okay. You can start a sentence with a conjunction, an and or a but. Now, here's my caveat on that. Yes, you can, but you don't do it often. If you start a sentence with an and or a but, it better be there for a very important reason and a reason that you can justify. If you start in, let's say you've written a 70,000 word book, I would say if you used it more than 3 times, you've overused it, starting a sentence with a conjunction. So you've got to be very careful. And that leads me to the next point I want to make about and but. Well, if you're using any word processing, you can find words by usually under the edit. There's a place where you can type in a word and it will find all that word throughout your document. I would suggest if you're writing, put and in there and look at all your ands, and put but in there and look at all your buts. I wrote about 2,000 words the other day, and I put it in my thing. I did this. I have this program I use called Pro Writing Aid, and it does all of this about words choices and which words I make used over and used. But I always go back and put and in the end, which they don't do. They don't count those. And I always go back and look. Only 2,000 words, I had 68 ands. Well, that's too many. So I go through, and what I do now, I'm not saying everybody should do this, all right? This is my rule for me. My rule is I never use more than 6 ands on any page. 6 is my limit. And I will find ways to write around that and cut down the number of ands. There are times I've written whole pages, 2 pages, and never used an and. Then all of a sudden I'll hit a page and I got 16 ands on a page. So you have to kind of make a balance there. But the same way. Howard is very good about noticing the buts in there, and I give him credit for this, and he's made me much more aware of my own failures in that area. And again, I go through, and after I do and, I put the word but in, how many times I use it. If I have 2,000 words and I've used but more than 4 times, I've probably overused it. Now, one thing is, you do not have to use it just in opposition. It can be used as a negative. There are ways that you can use it that are different. But it doesn't matter. And notice I use the word but. It doesn't matter right there. I will say this about dialogue. If you're writing fiction and you're writing dialogue, okay? When people talk, they seldom use the word and in dialogue. When you're just talking with someone, you seldom use it, and you seldom use the word but in dialogue. It's just an interesting little quirk. But that's it on conjunctions today, and it fits for whether you're writing fiction, nonfiction, even poetry. That repetition of words, unless you've got a reason to repeat them, you have to be very careful about them, and you want to get those repetitions out of your work as much as you can. With that, I say adieu and goodbye.
Oh, thank you, Jim. That was very edifying. And I wanted to use the word but I can't now. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Les Edgerton. I met Les about 1.5 years ago, and as you may or may not know, the people who serve on the board have the obligation of finding guest speakers and ones that are beneficial to our members. And I was looking online for a guest speaker, and I wanted to find somebody who knew something about writing. And I was looking at people who've written books about writing. And I saw this article on in Writer's Digest, which is a very well-respected journal among writers. And I saw this article, and it had a list of the 10 top books on writing. And Les Edgerton's book, Hooked, was among them. And let me just show you a copy of it. I own one. And I don't know, whoever wrote the subtitle is a genius. It's called Hooked, Write Fiction That Grabs Readers at Page 1 and Never Lets Them Go. Who wouldn't want that? So, but there were like 10 people on the list, and I contacted a few of them. And this is just my personal experience, but people who are professors are not very approachable. You know, they do live in an ivory tower, and they do have secure jobs, and they're writing. They don't have to deal with anybody they don't want to, and they don't. So, but Les Edgerton responded, and I like the cut of his jib, as they say, right away. He has a very interesting background, and he's lived a very, I don't know, a life full of experience. Let me just put it that way. And he draws upon that experience in his writing. And one of the things that I noticed about his writing is that he's brutally honest. And I know that a lot of writers, when they start writing, they're afraid to be honest. And the reason is because they suspect that the readers will think that whatever's said in this book can be attributed to feelings that they may have themselves as the author. And so they hesitate. They don't want to risk putting themselves out into a negative frame of mind in the public. But Les doesn't. Les is very straightforward. He's what I call a brave writer. And there are people that I know, and some in our groups, who are brave writers. They just tell it like they see it, like they felt it, like they know it. And that's a wonderful attribute. And I see that even in poetry. And I always like to comment on it, because it takes some guts to put it aside your own personal feelings about how people view you and just go ahead and write the story. And Les does a marvelous job of doing that. And in preparing to introduce him, I went through his books on Amazon, and they have that look inside feature. And I looked inside, and I would recommend that all of you go ahead and look inside Les's books on Amazon. It doesn't cost anything to look inside. And you can see, you know, something about his style of writing. But there was one book in particular. It was called The Rapist. And I thought, how would somebody make this an interesting book? How could, you want to write about this subject? But he did. And the people who wrote blurbs for this book were so laudatory. And there was one in particular that I read that was a very long blurb. And I thought the blurb itself was a literary work. And I don't know if this was Les's cousin or nephew or somebody who wrote it, but the guy did a great job in describing Les's writing. His name was Courtwright McNeil. And he talked about a level of writing that only some writers can achieve. And it's a level so high and, so wonderful that you do notice it when you read it. And I'm just going to take a little excerpt from that blurb that Courtwright McNeil wrote. And it says, this book is his poem, his testament, his art, boiled down to its elemental genius. Edgerton's vision, while it seethes, ultimately dissolves rage and hatred in its pages. And as it lifts you up, way up above earth, emerges with something better on the other side, something that only literature in its finest moments can provide. Those are glorious words. If any writer had that said about them, they would just be elated, and they would know that when they died, they had achieved a great plateau as a writer. And someone believes Les Edgerton has done that, and I believe it too. And I think that you should take a look and see, because people who write in different genres, they don't know what other people think of their writing sometimes because they attract readers to that genre. But literature can be great in any genre. And I think Les Edgerton has shown that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Les. I asked him to talk about how to avoid writing a novel that won't get read. And I got those words from his book on writing, Hooked. And I'm sure he knows a lot about how to avoid writing a novel that won't get read. So Les, take it away. Can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Testing, testing. Can you hear it?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
This is Jack Holland. He's a writer from your part of the country that recently moved to Fort Wayne from 29 years in LA. He's a screenwriter and he's learning to write fiction with me, but he's my IT guy too. So he's in the background, but he's here. Can you all hear me now? Okay. Howard gave me a brilliant topic. In fact, when I got into this, I'm thinking of creating another craft book on it. But I want to give you some what I consider good tips on how to get read, write a book that people will actually read. And the first one is, I think this is worth the price of admission. A lot of people know this and a lot of people don't. But think about how people read books. Can anybody tell me when most people read in their day-to-day life? Isn't it when they go to bed to get sleepy and they got a bookmark ready? What you want to do is keep them up all night. And there's a very easy way to do this because we're taught wrong in a lot of English classes. Sorry, being English teachers, but we're taught to complete scenes and all this. And after that, that's the end of a chapter. That is absolutely the worst place to end a chapter. You should never end on an ending. You should end right before an ending, because the reader's so trained to do that, they will read the next chapter, even if it ends in the first sentence, they'll continue till the next chapter. And you want to do that all the way through. That one little tip will create a page turner for you, and that's what we all want. There's a book I read, Larry Watson's Montana 1948, and I stayed up all night. I was just going to read a few sentences, and I stayed up all night and read the whole thing. When I got to the end, there was a thing by the guy that picked it for the award it won. And he said exactly the same thing. He said, I picked this up. I was going to read a chapter or two and then go to bed. He says, I could not put it down. And I went back and looked at how he achieved that. And what he did was he never ended at the conclusion of a scene. He always carried the scene into the next chapter. If you do that one little thing, you will transform your book. I promise you. That's one thing. I've got several notes here. Story structure is another thing that I think prevents people from reading their book. I see so much misinformation online in groups and in books and everything. Story structure is generally not taught very well in school and classes, high school or college, because the proof's all around us. I see things of like subplots and all this crap, and people are focused on the wrong things. Story structure is very, very simple. Today's literature is about one thing and one thing only, and that's always trouble. It's always about trouble, nothing else. Okay? If you accept that, then today's novel has to begin in only one place, and that's when the trouble begins. Not 5 minutes before, not 5 years before, not 5 weeks before. When the trouble begins, which is what we call the inciting incident. Stories today better begin there. And we got that from movies. When movies started, they took their cues from literature. Now we take our cues from movies. Okay, you guys are in California, so probably a lot of you are in the industry and can attest to that. So you start with the inciting incident. We don't need any backstory. You cannot invent a situation where backstory is important. You just can't. I'm going to use the movie Thelma and Louise. I hope most of you are familiar with it because I think it's the best teaching movie ever written, book or movie. And stories should begin with the inciting incident. In any good novel, there are always three major turning points. Okay, that's I teach an outline method where we have 5 statements and it consists of 15 to 22 words. That's it. We don't count articles like the and those type of things. But anyway, the first statement is the inciting incident. Describe that. The next 3 are the 3 major turning points in a novel. And the 5th is the resolution, and a good resolution contains a win and a loss. Okay, that's it. I know there's big arguments between pantsers and plotters and all this, but I wouldn't take a trip to Alaska if I didn't have a map. I've never been there, and I'm not just going to start driving north because I'm going to waste a lot of gas, make a lot of wrong turns and everything. So this is a very simple outline. All my students are required to start with that, a 5-sentence outline. And if they change it, which happens, then they just simply change your outline and you always have a map to go on. So I'm sorry. I had a series of TIAs lately, so my talking sometimes I have to slow down a little bit. Okay, my brain gets ahead of my mouth, so I hope you'll bear with me. I see a lot of terms that I go nuts about. I see terms like main characters and heroes and villains and all this crap. And there's only 2 important characters in any novel. And that's the protagonist and the antagonist. And there's no morality. There should be no morality assigned to either definition. The protagonist is simply the person we, as readers, experience the story through their view, through their viewpoint, through their eyes. The antagonist is simply the person whose goals conflict the most with the protagonist. That's it. It's not heroes and villains. If you look at your characters like that, you're going to create cartoon one-dimensional characters. Snidely Whiplash versus Dudley Do-Right. And I see so much morality thrown around in advice to writers and everything. I don't see that there's any room for that. That's not the definition of a protagonist or an antagonist. It's not good guys versus bad guys, none of that. I don't believe in co-protagonists. One of the main rules in writing is you want to keep isolating people to one-on-one situations. You want to get out of crowds as much as possible. And when you've got a co-protagonist, who are they supposed to follow? The reader doesn't have a clue. You spread the interest too thin. And I just don't believe in heroes and villains, anti-heroes. There's a protagonist. The story's told through the protagonist's point of view, and that's it. And the antagonist is the most important character in any story. The antagonist is the one that's going to make or break your story. That's why you read a lot of stories, and the protagonist is really boring. Silence of the Lambs, Jodie Foster's character is largely forgettable. The interesting character is Hannibal Lecter. Am I right? Always. And I hear some other stuff about antagonists that will say, make them like kittens, meaning give them some kind of good quality so they're not totally black. I had a professor, an advisor, and when I got my MFA, and she said, Sharon, he start, and she said, no, do not do that. She said, instead, paint your villains as black as you can, because if you do that, the light will shine through the cracks. And she was spot on. And she's a brilliant writer. When you say make them like kittens and all this stuff, what you've done is you try to mellow out the characters. Okay? So I wouldn't do that. The only reason you should have a subplot is that it serves the main plot. It shouldn't be, I see people say, well, I've got to create a subplot because I have to get some romance in this thing. That's crap. You're trying to put window dressing on something that shouldn't need window dressing. That's the only reason a subplot should exist, is to serve the main plot. Okay. Character arc. Thelma Louise has got great ideas on how to do character arc. She uses tools as well as actions and everything. If you're familiar with the movie, it starts out they're packing, going on a trip, and Thelma picks up this gun gingerly, like she's afraid it's going to go off. At the end, she's whipping that gun around like she's Wyatt Earp. That's a character arc tool. Okay, same way. She starts out eating candy bars and Louise is smoking. One's the act of a child, the other's the act of an adult. At the end, she's smoking like she's been smoking all her life. She's not doing candy bars anymore. When she first starts drinking, she buys these miniatures. That's what kids buy. At the end, she's buying full bottle. Those are all tools you can use to help create character arc. The resolution, I talked about that. We used to say that we used to give different definitions to resolutions. Today, the definition is it should contain a win and a loss. It shouldn't be one side or the other. Okay. Openings, as Howard mentioned, I've got a book called Hooked Out, and that's what it's about. And people misunderstand what I'm trying to say in that all the time because they open with melodramatic openings. That's the wrong place to begin. Those start with a murder or a shooting or a kidnap. Where do you go from that? 2 more murders, 10 more murders? You can't top it. Start small with the small dramatic opening and build from there. In Thelma and Louise, I do a presentation on that I've done for years. It takes about 5 hours. And at the beginning, I don't tell them where the inciting incident is, and I'll ask them later, and they'll say, "Oh, it's when Louise shoots and kills Harlan, the would-be rapist." No, that's not the inciting incident at all. The inciting incident is right at the very beginning, where Thelma goes to ask her husband for permission to go on this trip, and she starts twice to ask him, and both times he dismisses her out of hand, and that's the inciting incident. That creates a story problem for her. She's had a problem in real life for 8 years with this guy, but it hasn't achieved the level of a story problem yet until she can't do anything but think and work on this problem. That's the definition of an inciting incident is that it's something that happens to the protagonist that creates and or reveals the story problem to them. Okay. This is an instance where she's had a problem for 8 years, but it hasn't risen to the level of story problem yet because she can ignore it from time to time and forget about it. Your character cannot do that. Once the story problem is introduced, it has from page 1 to page 320 or wherever you write 30 or the end, she has to be focused on that problem with every action, every deed she does. Okay. Always before it hadn't achieved that level. The second time he dismisses her out of hand, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Now she realizes she has a problem, and her first action is a reaction, which it has to be because it's something that happened to her. And after that, she has to become proactive on her own behalf to resolve her problem. Okay, that's all the story is. It's that simple. And the heartbeat of a story is trouble. And I've got, in fact, Jack's one of my students. He's very typical writer in real life. You try to avoid trouble in real life. As a writer, you better be looking for trouble for your characters always. As much trouble as you can pile on them, the better. That's going to make your writing interesting. There are 3 levels of interest that a reader can show your protagonist, and that's identification. The second is sympathy, that's stronger, and the third, the most strong, is empathy. It's very hard to get empathy. If you can achieve empathy in a large number of readers, then you really got something on your hands. Identification is simply, there's something about the protagonist that the reader identifies with. If you've got a 13-year-old girl that works in a shoe store in a mall, teenage girls, even teenage boys, people that work in malls, people that go to malls, people that work in shoe stores can all identify with her. All right, that's very simple, and there's only a certain number of people that can identify. Sympathy is the next strongest form of creating interest in your character, and sympathy is when a wife is pregnant and a husband feels sorry for her, and he's always trying to help her out and everything. The strongest is empathy, and empathy is when he not only feels sorry for her, he feels the birth pains. That's empathy. That's very hard to achieve, but that's what you should strive for as much as you possibly can. Okay. By the way, if anybody has questions, just yell them out or whatever, okay?
We do have a question in the chat, since you're asking for questions. Barbara, do you want to unmute and ask your question? If not, I can ask it from the chat.
Sure, I can ask. I'm just wondering if I usually have the inciting incident involve the protagonist. Should
Right.
it can it involve the antagonist instead?
It could, but that's not necessary. But it has to involve the protagonist.
Okay.
Has to. That's the only person the inciting incident is important to.
Okay.
Does that answer you?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. And like I say, it's so important, and people misunderstand this all the time. I get emails all the time from people. I read your book, I love it, and I use it, and then they send me the first 5 pages of their story, and it begins with a murder or something. I thought, Jesus, you did not read the book. You opened melodramatically. What are you going to do now? Have 15 more murders? Where do you go from that kind of stuff? You can't. It's virtually impossible. Okay. Dialogue is important, and you should strive for off the nose dialogue. And you guys are probably in the heart of the movie industry, so you're probably more familiar with it than most audiences. But you do what Miles Davis suggested. He always tried to play the notes that weren't there. And I think that's powerful advice for writers. Okay. I see this all the time too. People say, well, my character wouldn't do this. Then you better get rid of your character, because it's not going to work if you don't ever go against character all the time, constantly. Look at Thelma and Louise. Her character is, she's a little mouse. She's under the thumb of a husband. She wouldn't say boo without his permission. Very first thing she does once she recognizes she's got a problem is defy him. She acts out of character. Every single step is out of character. If you don't have your character acting out of character, you don't have much of a story. You just don't. Does that make sense? Nods. Okay. Don't ever use that excuse. Always have her act out of character.
Okay, we do have a question from in the room.
I just asked about dialogue and Miles Davis. Can you define a little bit more about the Miles Davis comment?
Yeah, it's in dialogue. Subtext is what's important, which you don't say. As anybody that's in the movies knows that very well. He plays the notes that aren't there. He doesn't play the notes; they're not there. But he gives you he creates a piece of work that suggests what he's not playing very strongly. I'm explaining that badly, I know, but hopefully you're smart enough you'll get what I'm trying to say. Does that help any?
Yes.
Okay. Another thing, I wrote these notes down over the last couple of weeks and everything, so I'm kind of all over the map. I'm like a fart in a skillet. But anyway, when people try to get an agent, they don't use their smarts a lot of times. Somebody's writing a thriller, so they think the thriller writer I like is the guy that wrote Jack Reacher, so they go after his agent. It's the biggest mistake in the world. You do not want Jack Reacher's agent if you write thrillers, because he's not going to pay any. If he even takes you on, who do you think he's going to get the best contracts for? Who do you think he's going to work the hardest for? The guy who wrote Jack Reacher. All right. You don't want those people. You do not want them. A friend of mine, Matt Hilton, he's an English writer, writes thrillers, and he came to me for suggestions, and he was going to go after some thriller agents like David Balducci and some of those people. And I said, this biggest mistake you can make, that's their bread and butter. That's the guy that they're going to spend all their time and all their energy and everything on. You do not want that guy. You want the guy that wants the next Jack Reacher's writer. Does that make sense? So when you're looking for things like agents, be smart about it. All right. Beware of using brand names for models, writing models. They're the worst people in the world, because they can get their grocery list published and you can't. Most of you can't. Maybe there's some that can. If you're using people like Stephen King and James Patterson and Grisham, people like that, they're the wrong models for almost everybody. In my opinion, I don't think they're that great of writers, but anyway, that's another story. But anyway, you do not copy what brand writers do, because they can break all the rules and get published, because the publisher knows they've got a ready-made audience. They'd let them break every rule in the book. You're not allowed to do that until you become that level. When you become that level, yeah, you can. But right now, most of us can't unless you've been published and published very well. The main thing is never pass up an opportunity to give your protagonist trouble. If you've got him stopping for directions to a bar that's in the next block, have him stop and ask a street bum, and he says, "What I look like, a chamber of commerce." Depending on the level of the problem, always throw obstacles in their way. Always, always, always. In real life, we avoid those. In fiction, you better look for them, seek them out, create them. Always give trouble. There's some writers, I call it writer's bumper sticker things. It's like, write what you know. It's the worst piece of bullshit advice ever given, but it's easy. It fits on a bumper sticker. Okay, if you write what you know, you probably can't write sci-fi or historical fiction because you weren't there. All right. If you haven't murdered somebody, how are you going to write a murder mystery if you're only going to write what you know? You write what you can create, what you can convince the reader you know. That's it. That's the full saying, but it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. Okay. Is there any, there's another one it's very popular. Jack?
We do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Karen, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, Karen.
Hi, she didn't read my next message. I told her she could go ahead and ask the question. So you were talking about looking for an agent that hasn't represented a big name. So how do you find a loser agent?
Well, it's not a loser agent. No, I don't mean a loser agent, but you don't. But if your genre is thrillers, you don't want to get Lee Child's agent, right? He's not going to pay you. If he takes you on, he may take you on, he may like your writing. But who do you think his manuscript is under his arm when he goes around and visits offices? It won't be yours. You're going to be the bedheaded stepchild, right?
I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm just saying, how do you find the guy who hasn't had that big winner yet?
Well, you can have big winners, but probably in another genre than what you're writing in. All right. You don't want to seek out losers, although you're gonna find plenty of them. Trust me. The average agent is just a salesman. That's all they are. We give them way too much power, and we exceed too much importance to them. They could be selling Florsheim shoes. I had the best agent in the world at one time, Jimmy Vines. Old timers will know him. He was the one they wrote the movie Show Me the Money. It was modeled after him. He was then he screwed up. He took a manuscript from an unknown writer in Mississippi, and him and Jesse, I forget Jesse's last name, he co-started Endeavor out in your part of the world. They tried to pass it off as his script and make a movie of it, and he got caught. So he got drummed out of he got me at my first big contract, went to auction, which is virtually unknown for an unknown writer. And there's a big sad story about that I won't go into here. But Jimmy was a player. But he wasn't a good agent in the end because he's a crook. And a lot of them are crooks, trust me. I've got 3 publishing houses right now. We're investigating they're reporting my royalties because they're wrong. And it's done on purpose. You got to beware of people. Anybody that ever signs a blueprint contract is an idiot. Trust me on this. Trust me. That publishers aren't evil necessarily, but they're never going to send you a contract that's to your favor. It's always going to be in their favor. That's why you need an agent. Well, you always need an agent. You will get taken to the cleaners in so many ways. Book just sold the Japanese rights, and they paid me, I think it was $3,500 for the Japanese rights for an advance, and that's pretty sizable for a book that's been in print for like 15 years. All right, but unfortunately, I wrote Writer's Digest published it. They went out of business. They went bankrupt, and Penguin picked them up. So that book belongs to Penguin now, and I'd forgotten that, and my agent wasn't too sharp at the time, and he didn't get those rights reverted to me. I got rights, but at a very low percentage. My agent that I have now, or had now, she's retired. She's in Dublin. She's an international agent, And she talked to him, said, give Les more. He deserves more. So they upped my percentage. That was nice of them. But I still lost money on that deal. If I'd had her for an agent, she would have never let them have any rights for translation rights. She wouldn't have given it to them. But people do this stuff all the time. Even so-called good agents give away rights. Be very, very careful who your agent is, and if they're actually doing some agenting, they're actually looking at your contract very closely, because there's a lot of them that are lazy. Trust me on this, a lot of them, and there's a lot of them don't know what they're doing, and I'm talking about prominent people often too. Okay, does that answer it? I think you're muted, Karen.
Yes, but it also pulled you off of where you were headed. So please go on.
I'm like a fart in a skillet. Don't worry about that. Right. Which is another question. Another question, you said? Was there another question?
I have a question.
We have one in the room. Hold on a second.
Okay.
Okay, while he's walking to the mic, we do have Brenda. So Brenda, you're on deck if you have a question or a comment. Hold on.
In addition, my name's Jerry. In addition to your agent, do you have like an attorney, an equivalent to like an entertainment or a literary attorney?
I don't.
Everything.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not at that level. If I were, I don't even want to use the name Stephen King. Absolutely, I would, because everybody's out to get your money. They just are. That's their job. Make money for their company.
Well, Howard has a question. Howard, would you like to unmute?
Yes, I would love to unmute. I have a question about your use of language. I notice you have no problem using the word got. And
using the word what?
Got, G-O-T. Got, or using the passive voice. How important is the language usage in your book?
Oh, I don't use my spoken language in books as a rule.
Mm-hmm.
That's totally different.
Well, do you go by the rules of grammar, or?
Not as much as you'd think. It's like the gentleman who was talking about ending with the preposition. I was an English major and all that stuff. I don't even know what that is anymore. I don't care. If it reads well and it's interesting, that's all that's important.
Okay.
So if you're going to be a stickler for rules, plus I would disagree with the MLA. That's not the style book for fiction writers. Style book for fiction writers is the AP.
Mm-hmm.
The other's an academic thing. It's more for nonfiction, that kind of thing. That's the second person I've ever heard say, and I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes or anything like that. It just kind of struck me.
Yeah.
When we mentioned the Chicago Manual or whatever. Those are more for academic writings and that kind of thing.
Well, do editors ever try to impose their language views on your writing?
Yeah, I had a big deal with Writer's Digest, in fact, because I used a made up word. It was, oh God. It was the word get, G-I-T. I wanted to use that, and she said, no, write it as G-E-T. I said, no, that's not the word. That's not the way I say it. And I forget the phrase I was using. So we had a big deal. That's why I don't publish Writer's Digest anymore. They offered me 10,000 advance, which is what they always paid me way back when. And I turned them down because they want to control things and they don't know what they're doing. Look at the books they put out. Most of them, I'm sorry, are crap. They really are. They're rehashed stuff. There's so many writing books that just steal from other people. I hate to use his name, but Stephen King's got a book out on writing. There's not an original thought of Stephen King's in any of that. He stole from everybody else. What pisses me off is Harry Crews is the one that came up with the saying that I try to leave out the parts that people skip when they read. And Stephen King put it in. He didn't attribute to himself, but he didn't give credit to the guy. And people assume he's the one that came up with it. No, he's not.
No.
As with most of the stuff in there. What's his name? The guy died from Detroit. I'm a big admirer of him. He wrote who?
Elmore Leonard.
Yeah, Elmore Leonard. He's got a book on. It's on writing, but it's all stuff that he got from other people. They're valid stuff, but they're not his stuff. And he says that in his book. I think he's upfront about it. But I think you should give credit where credit's due. And a lot of these people don't. They've been doing it because they picked it up from somebody else, but they don't want to give them credit. Or maybe they don't even know where they got it. They maybe they think they invented it. Most of them didn't. Anymore.
None from the room. Anybody on Zoom?
Would you say it's good to have an editor or not?
Things I tell my students I don't do, like I tell writing is rewriting. I don't rewrite it ever. Never have. But I make sure it's right when I finish that day. I just don't rewrite. If I do that, I would write the life out of it. But I will tell, but most writers aren't me. I can do some things that I know other people. There's a story I use in one of my books about Barry Bonds. I don't know if you like Barry or not. I think he's the greatest baseball player ever lived, but I'm a Giants fan all the way. So anyway, Barry hit a home run years ago in this ballpark. It was a real unusual the way he hit it, where he hit it to the pitch and all this. And this reporter came to him and said, "Barry, can you tell me how you hit that home run?" And Bonds says, "No, I can't." He says, "Because you can't do what I do. Why would I tell you you can't do it? You're not capable of doing it. So I'm wasting my time and your time." And that's my attitude. I know what I can do, and I can do things a lot of writers can't. So why would I try to explain something to them that I know they're never going to be able to do? I would not advise most writers not to rewrite. I would advise them to rewrite. Most writers, it does them good. It doesn't do me any good. I'm a different kind of writer. Okay, that sounds arrogant, and it is, but that's all right. You can be arrogant if you can back it up. I had millions of notes, and I burned through them so quick I didn't go into depth in any of them. Somebody's got to have a question. There's no such thing as a dumb question.
Actually, we do. Richard, who is on Zoom, says he has a comment or a question. Go ahead, Richard.
Hi, Les. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can't see you.
Yeah, hold on.
I guess I don't need it. Oh, yeah, there you are. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Oh, it's coming up. Okay. I just wanted to tell you, again, I wrote to you before when I read it, but the book you wrote, Finding Your Voice, is probably at least one of the best, if not the best books on writing I've ever
Can you say that
read.
a lot louder?
Because it's unique and it refers to what you were saying. What you write in this book, I haven't read that anywhere. The classics, the unknowns, and it helped me a lot. It changed my point of view on writing. And I think it should be required reading for everybody here.
Well, thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. That was my first craft book. And I got that. I'm an ex-con. I was in prison for a couple of years for burglary and armed robbery and some other stuff. I've cleaned up my act now, and you can invite me to your house. So you don't have to count the silverware when I leave. Probably don't. But if it's worth a lot, maybe you should count it. But anyway, I used to go to Pendleton where I did my time once or twice a year and visit with inmates. I did that for years. And always I'd get these guys, they'd write me these letters, and they wanted to become a writer. Most of them are illiterate. The average education when I was in the joint, the state joint, was about 4th grade. Okay. But there's some talent there occasionally, not as a rule. But anyway, they'd write me these stories full of all kinds of grammatical mistakes and everything, but they told stories of car chases and burglaries and everything. They were wonderful stories. And so I'd encourage them. I'd say, write a story about this. So what they did was I'd get Zane Grey rehashes. That was the only books in our library were Zane Grey books. That was about, there's not much in prison libraries. There didn't used to be anyway. And so that they try to write like a writer. That's where I got the idea for Finding Your Voice, because they got their voice before it was educated was a great voice. They changed it all because they were either intimidated or whatever by the people on the shelves, and they shouldn't be, because they had great stories and they told them well. That's the person probably needed an editor. That's fine. They told great stories, but in their own voice, and they're just writing me a letter. Once they started to write professionally, it fell apart. So that's why I wrote that book, to point out the difference and why you should always write in your voice. We've got a Hemingway already. We don't need Hemingway Jr., Hemingway II. We don't need him. We got one. We don't need a Joyce Carol Oates. We've got one. Write like yourself. The thing is, people think their readers are people they know. They think they're their relatives, their wives, husbands, the people they work with, the people they party with. Those are not your readers as a rule. Your reader you may never see. Your reader may be somebody in Ames, Iowa. They may be somebody in Auckland, whatever. You may never see them, or very many of them, but we try to write to please our acquaintances. A lot of times a huge mistake. Huge mistake. When I wrote The Rapist or The Bitch, I don't know of anybody in my circle that would pick it up voluntarily and read it. It's not their cup of tea. Although my wife fooled me. My wife rarely reads my books because I scare her. It's good. It's a good relationship. Anyway, she says, I read The Rapist, and she said, I was shocked. She said, it was like you crawled inside my head and read my thoughts. And I thought, wow, I never expected that from her. I never expected her to read it. But you'll be surprised. But your readers are not, don't write for the people in your club here, your group, because those are probably not going to be your readers. They're probably closer than anybody else you know. But as a rule, they're probably not your readers either. Your readers you may never meet. You may never see. Yeah.
But you see, the lesson I got from your book was I realized I was trying to write like a writer.
Yeah.
And I wasn't thinking about my friends or my group, or that might be another problem for other writers. But as far as I'm concerned, I was trying to write probably as a writer should write, and you blew all those ideas out of the water. Yeah. And that was a really big eye opener for me.
Thank you. We're getting close to a deal with Japan on that book too. So hopefully not going to.
We've got a couple of questions from the chat. Are you ready for a couple of questions? So let's go to Jerry Green. Jerry, you want to unmute and ask your question? Jerry, do you want to unmute, or do you want me to ask the question for you? Okay, well, I guess I'll ask her question. She's asking, do you stick to your initial plan for an ending, or do things morph on the way?
Usually, my method of working is I've got to have a story percolating in my brain for about 10 years before I sit down to write it. At any given time, I've got 5 to 10 stories. I've been doing this for years. I've got 3 stories I'm writing now. I'm ADD, so I have an advantage as a writer, because people think that's a disadvantage. It's not. For a writer, it's great, because I write multiple novels at a time. When I get bored of something, I just close that file and pull up another one. But anyway, so I'm never bored, and I can always be productive when I sit down. If you got ADD, it's not a curse. It's a blessing. Trust me. Anyway, I've got far afield of what you asked me. Which, would you repeat that, please?
She is asking whether you stick to your initial plan for an ending, or do things morph along the way?
Often they don't, because I know the story cold, but sometimes they do. And that's what I said at the beginning about our outline. It's a very short, brief outline. It's not Mrs. Gundy's Roman numeral page after page of descriptions and all this crap. It's very brief. It's the basics. Often something will occur to me in the writing that's better. So that's no problem. I just changed my outline. I still got a map. It's 24 words most. So it's very easy to change, but then I still have a roadmap. So yeah, it happens. And that's why I tell my students, and I've got a student right now. He's brand new to, and I beat him up. They call my class Celeste's boot camp, and it is boot camp. I'm mean to people. I tell people, take that crap out in your backyard and bury it so deep you can never find it again. I had a lady, Megan Beaumont, who's a very prolific writer now. I was teaching this class for Phoenix College, not Phoenix University, the internet thing, but the real school at Phoenix College. It was a 12-week class. She came to class with the 400-page completed novel, which I told her right away, take that crap out and bury it. You don't want a word out of it, it's crap. And so in my class, you have to create an outline and an inciting incident, and you get 4 pages to do that to my satisfaction before you can submit anymore. She was in class 10 weeks and never progressed past the 4 pages. Couldn't grasp the inciting incident. She told me later she threw things. She had my picture on her wall. She threw things at me. She cursed me out. She went up and hit me, did all kinds of things, but she stuck it out. Now she's got books all over the place, won all kinds of major awards and everything, but she stuck it out. But I used to teach in university. I used to teach in UCLA and a bunch of other places. I can't teach in a university because they don't look at people as students. They look at them as customers. They want you back in the seat. So what they do, they want you to teach what they call the sandwich method of teaching. And that's where you give a bit of praise, then a bit of criticism, and then a bit of praise. I can't do that. There's people I can't even, as talented as I am making things up, I can't think of anything good to say about their writing. I'm not going to lie to them. It's the most evil, unfair thing you can ever do to a writer is tell them something's good and it's not. That's crap. If you think that's being nice to you, it's not. It's the worst thing that can happen to you as a writer, to get a dishonest teacher that wants you to like him. I don't care if you like me or not. I want you to become a great writer. And that's what our classes are about. And we do. In about 12 years, I've had over 3 dozen people get published out of them. And I mean published legitimately, not self-published or independent or any of that stuff. Published by legitimate publishers. So I don't know if anybody else has that kind of track record. There may be, but I'm not aware of them. But no, but we'll say it, I'll say it sucks, but then I'll tell you why it sucks and show you how to fix it so it doesn't suck.
We have another question. Howard, your hand's up. Are you wanting another question?
Yes. I wanted to ask you how you decided you would be a writer. You know, what got you started in writing? And I also, just based on your last comment, do you think self-publishing is illegitimate?
Personally, I do. And I have a lot of friends that do. I won't blurb their work because it hadn't been vetted by anybody. And they're basically, my experience, they're going to sell 50 copies to their friends and relatives that they coerce into buying them. Back to the first part of your question, though, I kind of taught myself to read when I was 4. My mom read to me every night, and I didn't teach myself what I did. I memorized the shape of words and everything. And she was reading a book she'd read many times to me, and I continued reading it. Well, I wasn't reading, but she taught me phonics right after that, and I was off to the races. That's when I knew I was going to be a writer, and I've never wavered, not for a second ever. At that time, I thought I could write a better book than the one I was reading. I couldn't then, but I can now. I get students in the class that don't last long usually, that don't read. I thought, how are you going to ever be a writer? You're never going to be a writer. This, like you're talking about AI and all that earlier. If anybody's going to buy into that bullshit, I've got a Vision Brookline I like to sell. That's not writing. It's typing. That's like what what's his name said about Kerouac. He said that's not writing. That's typing. And it is. Anyway, no, I knew immediately. I've never ever wavered, never wanted to do anything else. I've done other things I've had to survive, but writing's always come first. I've been married 5 times to each of my wives. I've told them up front, my writing comes before you or anybody. Faulkner said it best. He said the ode to a Grecian urn is worth any number of old ladies. It's true. In my case, it's true.
You are
That-
dedicated.
No, I don't believe in self-publishing. To me, it's just another form of vanity press. And I understand a lot of people do it because now they have a book. They don't have a book. They have a printed copy of something. It's never going to sell more than 200 copies. And I know there are exceptions. I know there are people like the guy that wrote the Martian deal. What's his name? And I know about the handful of people that were successful self-publishing, but I don't think it's the way to go. I think it's giving up too early. I see people say in this age of electronics and the internet that I submitted to 25 people. You haven't done anything at all. My first novel went to 86 publishers. And that was in a day when we didn't have the internet. You had to buy postage there and back, which is often 30, 40 bucks. And we didn't have money to eat sometimes, but my wife knew my writing came first. I was down to the University of North Texas Press, and I went alphabetically. So I had about 3 more I could even send my manuscript to. And it was an accident that got taken. They haven't done any work when you're sending electronically some crappy letter and a sample. That's not submitting. If you haven't done it to 200 people, you haven't even started. You haven't even started. I'm sorry, I have no sympathy for people that say, well, it's too hard. Well, cry me a river. Go become a better writer and it'll probably get published.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, I tell it like I see it.
Mhm.
More?
Any more questions? I don't see any in the chat, and I don't see any in the room. Oh, wait a minute. Dennis has a question. Here, Dennis.
What are some challenges you've been able to overcome, not only as a teacher, but also as a writer?
Oh, God, a bunch. But they're not challenging. That's what makes it fun when you achieve publication. You've actually achieved something because you've gone through the fire. Okay? God, I had a book that went to auction, got down between Random House and St. Martin's. And my agent, Jimmy Vines, the asshole, said, you pick. St. Martin's offered me $50,000 advance, and Random House offered me 45. And I said, well, Random House, because I'm thinking Bennett Cerf and all this stuff, the history. And so I went with them. 3 weeks later, they got sold to Bertelsmann, and my book got shit canned. I got the first payment at $12,500. Eventually, it got published with a small publisher, sold maybe 500 copies. It was going to be a movie. Ann Godoff, who was president of Random House at the time, called me at home after I gave them the rights to it. And she said, Les, when this book comes out, it's not only going to come out on the bestseller list, it will come out as #1. Bestsellers aren't determined by sales like people think. They're determined by publication copies. They were going to bring it out in, I forget their paperback company, with 50,000 copies in paperback, 5,000 copies in hardcover. That would have guaranteed it would have gone right to the top of the bestseller list. When you go to the top of the bestseller list, there's going to be a movie. My fortune, I had success before. I sold a lot of magazine articles, a lot of other stuff, but I never quit my job because I heeded the warnings. But at that time, I thought in fact, they wanted to do a 3-book deal, which I turned down. Anyway, my book got shit canned. I got 12.5 of it, which they tried to get back, and I told them kiss my ass. They weren't getting a penny of it back, and the book languished. And then Jimmy got fired by SAR for trying to palm off another book as his. Anyway, that's kind of a low blow because I cut hair. Cutting hair wasn't my dream in 4th grade. It's what I learned in the joint. And it paid the bills for about 35 years. And I was very successful. I was hairdresser of the year nationally and a whole bunch of other stuff. I worked with Jose and all those people. I was a platform artist for Clairol, did big shows and all this stuff. And we had a very successful salon. And I closed it down because the dude signed a new lease, and I closed it down. And you don't build those up overnight. So my business was gone. But I thought, well, I've got this $50,000 or $45,000 deal, and they want more. It's going to be a movie. It's going to be all this. That was a pretty low point in my life. and I never recover. I still haven't recovered from that. But I've had a lot of stories like that. A lot of shit like that's happened. I when I got out of the joint, I decided I wanted to go to college. So I created a business. I made a business where it was illegal. I created a shop, and I didn't have the license for that. But I hired an old retired guy to keep his license in my shop, so I could earn some money. And I went to work for another guy, and then I worked 2 other jobs. Plus, I was elected student body president of IU, and I was a sports editor, and I worked as a sports writer for the South Bend Tribune, covered Notre Dame football. I got about 4 hours sleep a night and wrote. I found time to write. And I hear people say, well, I don't have time because I work these 5 days. And it's just killing me. And I hate my job. And they're a bunch of whiners. They don't know what work is. Just don't know what work is. Who? You're Tammy. What are you doing? Anyway, no, if you want to write, you'll find time. You'll make time. Every minute I had a pen and paper with me, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And then I had to go home and type it up. But no, a lot of setbacks. That's the deal. I never went into it for money. I walked away from jobs where I was making a lot of money because it was cutting into my writing time. I worked for Prudential, and I was their top salesman. And I walked away right when a new quarter was beginning. The way they pay you, they base your pay on what you did the preceding quarter. And I was doing a huge raise. And my boss told me, don't quit, Les. He said, you don't even have to come in the office for 12 weeks and you'll get a check every week. And I said, no, Prudential did something I consider unethical. And even though I'm an ex-con, I have some values and some morals. I wouldn't work for them anymore because of what they did. I wasn't going to take their money for nothing. I've never had anybody pay health insurance for me. I don't have a pension. I live on Social Security. I don't care. That's my life. I don't need more than one car. I don't need more than one shirt and pair of pants. I don't need anything else. I need a computer, and I need money to send postage, and that's all I need. And to buy paper. That's all you need. People have written great books in prison on paper, on backs of, I don't know, sacks. What do you need?
We do have another question. Jim Hitt has a question.
Yeah, you talked about Montana in 1948, a book my wife and I both loved. I tried to get it to my school to use it when I was teaching high school, to use it, and they wouldn't do it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a terrific.
It says a lot for schools, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But beyond that, I wanted to ask you, what other authors do you particularly admire?
Oh, there's a bunch of them. I like Harry Crews. He's one of my favorites. There's a good Canadian writer I really like. He's an up-and-comer, John, and I can never pronounce his name right. I've got a book here somewhere. Oh, he just wrote a new book I just blurred called Mason's Jar. Jan Tunen. He's an up-and-comer. He's going to rank up there with Cormac McCarthy and those people. Great writer. But Joe Lansdale, big favorite. I'm his favorite crime writer. And that's high praise for me. Most of my blurbs I get are from other writers, and that means more to me than anything. When other writers praise you and you're not twisting their arm or anything, that means something.
We have another question from Sue Andrews. Sue, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. You talked earlier about how these agents are just, I don't want to say the words you used, but, not very, they're hard to come by. So how do you suggest finding a good one? How do you vet one out?
First of all, I'd look for writing I liked that I thought was good writing, and I'd find out who their agent is, and that's very easy to do. That's probably the first and only step. Go to people that are already successful. But I know the guy, what's his name, writes the Reacher thing. He's always at Voucher, a conference I go to every year. In fact, when Tom Cruise signed to play the role of Reacher, Voucher Con was in Cleveland. He always sits in a table in a bar, very prominent. He's a big guy, he's 6'5". Lee Child. And I walked up and he says, I don't want to hear it because everybody's razzing on for hiring Tom Cruise to play Jack Reacher. And I said, no, Lee. I said, I understand. You're tired of hearing that. People laughing at you and shit. But I said, I know why they hired him. He said, okay, why? And I said, well, Hollywood's going through financial difficulties and they're downsizing and everything. They just downsized his role. And he said, get the out of here. So, but I write thrillers, but I would never go after his agent. His agent wouldn't have time. He might hire me. He might take me on. He's not going to do me any good. He just isn't. He's got a guy that makes him a fortune. He devotes every minute of every day to that guy. Now that guy and his son, because his son's co-writing, his son can't write for shit, but whatever. He's another one that actually gave some advice that I treasure. He said in an interview, Lee Child said, I put a question on every single page, a story question, every single page. That's what drives readers. That's one of the main things that create bestseller. The other thing is water cooler moments. I would advise people to include at least 6 to 8 water cooler moments in their book. And for those unfamiliar with the term, that in the old days in offices, they'd have a water cooler and people would take breaks and gather around a water cooler. And one would come up and say, you got to see this movie I saw last night. This guy had a scimitar and he's whirling all around and everything. This guy shakes his head, pulls out a gun and shoots him. That's a water cooler moment. That's what sells movies. That's what sells books. You want to include 6 to 8 of those.
Well, I'm not sure that answers my question, but
say it again if you would, Sue.
I'm sorry. So, say I have a book and I'm ready to try to find an agent.
Sure.
How do I vet one out? Because there's so many online, and like you did give one suggestion, and I agree with you on that. Is find the author of books that you like and see who their agents were. So that's one example. Can you give me another example?
I wouldn't just shotgun people. I would have a reason for writing them. I'll tell you, people find agents in the worst way. Do you all know who Janet? Oh God, she's an agent in New York. Janet, I have half Alzheimer's, so forgive. She's very prominent. And who?
No, that's okay. I said, go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, she just signed this guy at a VoucherCon conference, and she introduced me to him at the Indianapolis convention that year. And she said, so I was talking to this kid and I said, how'd you get Janet to be your agent? Because she takes very few people. And he says, I read every book that she represented and I outlined what was common to all of them. And he said, I wrote a book that fit all that. He wrote the book for the agent. That's all you got to write a book for is an agent.
Okay.
One person, a publisher, one person. That's all you have to write a book. You're thinking of that. You get the cart before the horse. Sell it to one person. They'll do the rest. Find out what makes their motor run.
Okay.
Okay. Does that help?
Yes. Thank you.
Chuck?
Okay, we've got Ellen Wolf has a question.
Okay, so I loved what you said about character arc tools and how in Thelma and Louise she went from eating candy bars to smoking cigarettes and handling the gun daintily and then swinging it around like Annie Oakley. Can you say more about character arc tools? That's sort of a new idea for me.
Okay, it's an old idea, but I understand it's new to you. Callie Corey, who wrote Thelma and Louise, is the genius. She wrote that at age 19 and won the Oscar for it. There's no a single scene in that movie doesn't contain a teachable moment, not a one. Jack, can you attest to that?
Yep.
He never seen the movie, and I do a presentation where I go through every single frame, and there's a teachable moment every single frame of that movie. It's brilliant. It really is. But see, I talk so much, I lose track of where I'm at. I got to get back on the track.
Character arc tools. Tool.
Hair in Thelma and Louise is a tool. When they start out, Thelma's is all messy and down. Louise is all up and tidy and neat. As the scenes go on, they come closer and closer together. One comes down, one goes up. And at the end, they become equal. They're both the same. Vistas are important. If you watch the movie, and this is Ridley's doing here, if you when they're getting chased and everything, there's rain clouds, there's trucks, huge trucks all around. There's danger all around them. When things open up and they gain freedom, the vistas open up. The skies turn blue. The sun comes out. There's wide open spaces. Things like that are character arcs. They're things that propel a movie or a book. We don't pay enough attention. We don't read as writers. We read as readers, and it's wrong.
Yeah.
The best way to teach yourself to become a good writer, a great writer, is to take note of those things that affect you emotionally in a book when you're reading, and figure out how that writer did that, and then just steal it. Good writers steal, they don't borrow.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
There's another thing about Thelma and Louise. It's the perfect structure for a novel. What happens is when she starts out, she's this timid little soul that's afraid to ask her husband anything. There's no backstory given. There's the backstory is she's wearing an apron, her hair's up, and she got recipes on the refrigerator, and she treats her husband as a vassal. Okay, that's the backstory. That's all you need to know. We know their whole. We don't even know they've been together 8 years, but we can pretty well guess it. We all see that we may be in a situation like this. We don't need backstory and setup and all this crap. We need a sentence is all we need for setup, for backstory. We don't need this. We always think, well, the reader won't understand my character unless they know something about her. That's such bull. That's not thinking. That's reacting to something you heard. Just parroting stuff. That's all it is. Your character better act out of character. So when the inciting incident happens, all the character can do is a reaction because something has happened to her. Her reaction is she doesn't ask his permission. Then she has to become proactive on her own behalf to resolve her problem. From that point forward, everything has to be proactive on her part, not someone else coming in. No John Wayne rescues, none of that shit. Okay, so the first thing she does, and it's established, the relationship is established immediately. They pull up to an intersection and they spot a club across the way, and she starts wheedling Louise to stop, like a little kid would beg her mom to stop for ice cream. Same thing. Oh, please, please. She's begging, panting like a dog and everything. So she's okay, we'll go. That's her first proactive action to achieve her independence. Okay, everything she does, she wasn't able to do the day before, or the action before. Every single action in that entire movie. The next move, they go in, she proceeds to get drunk. She would never have done that before she declared her independence. That's the second proactive action. She starts dancing with this guy. It's an obvious lech and all this. She would never have done that before. Okay, that leads to them going outside and he tries to rape her. And this is the moment I left out. The writer is the god of the story. You can make your characters do anything and everything you want them to do if you do it properly. And that's what Callie Corey does. She does what I call, she puts yeast in the problem and blows it up. If she wouldn't have done that, it wouldn't have been a story. It would have been a direct video. The yeast she puts in it, you have to keep the same problem all the way through it. Although that problem I call a surface problem leads to what I call the story-worthy problem, which is just a bigger manifestation of the same problem. Okay. Excuse me. Her problem is her husband and relationship she's in. He abuses her basically in every way you can think of. So she's done things she's never done before and never would have dared before. She's wheedled Louise to go to this bar. Now she's gotten drunk. Now she's dancing. She's flirting with this guy. Would have never done that the day before. Every single action in this movie is like that. It builds off the previous action directly. Okay, they go outside. Guy puts his move on her and everything. And then Louise comes out and defuses it because she's got the gun. Remember that gun that was planted earlier that she could barely hold? The gun's in her purse. She lays it on the back of his head. He gives up and backs off. Thelma goes up, she's crying, she's weeping, she emotionally and physically hurt. And the guy says one thing too many, and Louise turns around and shoots him and kills him. All right, she didn't have to do that. The situation was diffused. This is the only tricky part in the movie, but she did. Corey had her do what I call put yeast in a small problem and make it big. That's what she did by shooting that guy. Now they got a bigger problem than just Daryl, her husband. They got the law after him. They're automatically on a run now. It's become very big. It's still the same problem. She's still trying to get away from her husband. Oh, it's encompassed more males, and that's going to eventually lead to the story-worthy problem. Is that her problem isn't her husband? Her problem is she's a female trapped in a male-dominated world. That's the whole. But it's one and the same. It's the same problem at the end as it was before. It's just been revealed to her the total scope of her problem. Does that make sense? You don't change problems. The problem remains the same. It just becomes bigger and more encompassing. Right? Yeah. It's a brilliant movie. Just to structure it, any novel you want to, you can use that exact structure and it'll work. After that, they go on a run. She can't make up her mind, but Callie Corey, the writer, is throwing trouble at her at every turn, every single turn. She's not avoiding trouble. She's throwing it at her. It's that old saying, get your character up a tree and throw bigger and bigger rocks harder and harder at him. That's what you got to get him in trouble. You got to keep him in trouble. You got to keep piling it on. That's what makes a bestseller. That's one of the things. You can't give them a break ever. Never, never, never. Don't give them a break. You say the reader's got to rest. The reader doesn't have to rest. They're sitting on their ass. What do they got to rest for?
Okay, we have a couple more questions. One in the room.
Can you give a little bit more about reading as a writer? You talked about emotional and then dissecting, but talk about that.
Okay. When you name a book, a moment in a book that affected you emotionally. Who am I talking to, Howard?
Farewell to Manzanar.
I'm sorry, who?
Farewell to Manzanar.
I'm looking for your name.
This is Michelle. I am not on Zoom.
Oh, okay. Can you think of a well-known book that affected you emotionally, a scene in it or anything?
A Farewell to Manzanar.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't. I'm not familiar with the book. What was the scene that affected you? Be specific.
When the Japanese Americans were forced onto the trains and lost their businesses and lost everything.
Okay, I'm not familiar with, but that's pretty descriptive. What was it about that scene that affected you emotionally? There had to be something about that scene.
The whole story is told through the eyes of a young girl.
That doesn't matter.
Well, I'm not quite done.
Okay.
And so it was, I think, the innocence juxtaposed to the horrific events of the time.
Okay, how did the writer achieve that? How do you do that?
By showing it through the eyes of an innocent.
Ah, you just read as a writer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's how I usually read. That's why it's hard to enjoy books.
No, it's not. I'm gonna prove you wrong in that. Are you a basketball fan? Just say yes. Okay.
Yes, then. I am.
You know what a zone defense is and a man-to-man?
Yes, I do know that.
Okay. Does that destroy your enjoyment of the game?
No.
Doesn't it enhance it because you know more about the game?
Only if they're playing well.
The skill level?
Only if they're playing well. Because if they're not, then I have to leave the court and walk out.
Right. Same thing goes with a book. You have to leave the book if they're not writing well. Did you see how you look for something that affected you emotionally? There are two ways a book can affect a reader: intellectually and emotionally. Intellectually does not count. Emotionally is the only one that counts. Emotionally, not intellectually. There are a handful of people who say, "Oh no, I read because I'm real smart." They don't say I'm real smart. That's their animation. And I read to learn. And both. You read because it affects you emotionally. Look at those things that have affected you emotionally and go back and figure out how did that writer do that? Because I'll bet the same scene was presented 100 other times by other writers, did not affect you. Look to see what they did different. That's reading as a writer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I want to compliment you on that. This is Howard, and the book that affected me at a young age was From Here to Eternity.
Yeah.
And the bugle player falls in love with a prostitute,
Yeah.
and spends time with her, and he has to make it back to the base. But World War II breaks out, and these Japanese fighter jets shoot him. And then he's in a fight with the sergeant, and he gets stabbed, and
that's profound.
And finally, he dies, and they play taps. When they play they play taps, oh man, I just lost it. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Hey, Howard, have you used a similar scene in your own writing?
I almost, but not quite.
Then you haven't.
I haven't gotten there yet. Yeah,
you haven't used
I have
what you
I have
learned.
to play taps for somebody.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
that's how you learn to be a good writer, a great writer.
I hate to kill
Use
anyone,
that.
but I
Feel
have
it.
killed people in my book. So,
Good.
We have another question from Daniel. Daniel, go ahead, unmute.
Yeah, I just wanted Les to I hope that you're coming back to tell us more. I think you have a lot more to tell us, but I have one request. When you do, don't hold back so much. Tell us how you really feel.
I'll try, man. Hey, I like your bird. Those are good eating.
I'll tell him you
You
said
gotta
so.
have a half a dozen to make a meal.
Yeah, I'll tell him you said so, and maybe that'll keep him in line.
Thank you, sir. Come on, you guys have more questions.
I think they've pretty much been worn out, Les.
Well, has this been informative?
oh yeah, this has been great.
Get the movie Thelma and Louise and look, just trace Thelma's progress. There's no protagonist in that, no matter what you think. And if you don't believe me, look at the sex scene. The pivotal scene in the movie is when Thelma has sex with JT. What's his name? The boy actor. And that changes her, that transforms her into a woman, because it's the first time she's ever been approached with sex with a man on equal terms and treated as an equal. They don't show Louise's sex scene because she's not a co-protagonist. It would dilute the scene. We wouldn't know who to root for. They show her getting ready to have sex, and that's done with. In that scene too, the miniatures play a role. If those of you that remember it, because they get going hot and heavy and they brush the miniatures on the floor. That's getting rid of her childhood when she drank miniatures. Okay, there's all kinds of things you can use, but smoking is a great one, except nowadays the politically correct people have taken over the frickin' world, and I don't pay any attention to them, but you kind of have to, because the editor will make you, the publisher will make you. But I still fight them. If you can't be honest on the page, God, what are we as a country? We're nothing.
Well, Les, you're absolutely right. And one of the things I like about you and your writing is, often you find people who want to tell you about writing, but they haven't written, or they haven't written well. They don't know enough. And I had this when I was in sales. The manager would tell you how you're supposed to close the sale, but he never closed the sale. He wouldn't go out in the field and close the sale with you, show you how it's done. I never respected that person. You've got to show me how to do it before I'll listen to you. And you've shown us, and I think that's wonderful. And, you're an honest guy, and you're forthright, and you found something that really works well for you. And a lot of what you said, I think we can take a lesson from. So I do appreciate your talking to us today.
It's been absolutely a blast.
Good. I'm
sorry. My voice, I had those TIAs. I don't know if you guys know what those are, like a mini stroke. And I got to slow down sometimes, or I'm afraid I'm going to go to another and bigger one. So, because my mind works faster than my mouth.
Yeah.
And
Well, you take good care of yourself. I want to turn it over to Michelle to tell us about next month's guest speaker.
Thank you all
Hi,
so much.
Thank you, Les.
You're a great audience.
Okay, so next month, we have a twofer. We have two speakers. They're going to be tag teaming it, and that is someone who spoke to us back in about 2018, maybe, or 17, Tim Chismer from Vegas. He is actually going to be driving in. And then from Los Angeles is Mark Savage. And Tim is an award-winning speaker, headline comedian, so it's fun to hear him speak. Actor, producer, screenwriter, best-selling author. I won't go through his credits. I'll do that when I introduce them next month. And Mark Savage is an Australian-born director, producer, writer who sold his first feature at 24 years of age, and he has quite a list of credits since. They're going to be speaking on screenwriting, adapting your book to film, and selling the rights to Hollywood. So that might be an interesting topic. The next month, we'll be having a speaker from Tennessee. His name is Clay Stafford. He runs the Killer Nashville conference and teaches at the university, and he's very well respected on suspense, thriller, and like mystery, which he says is important for every genre. And then the following month will be on structure, and Lisa Kastner will be returning. She's the acquiring editor at Running Wild Press. So we have a pretty good lineup the next 3 months. If you want to get published in straitjackets, join Diamond Valley Writers Guild. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And I also want to remind everybody, if you want to make a good investment, get hooked. Got the nice little goldfish going toward the hook on the front cover, and Finding Your Voice. Those are two great books for writers, and I think you'll benefit from them greatly. And if you like crime and you like great writing, check out Les's books on Amazon or wherever you get books. And once again, Les, you've been a wonderful guest, and we do appreciate your coming and talking to us. So everybody in Hemet, if you're having lunch at the Mexican restaurant, have a nice lunch. And for the rest of you, have a great weekend.